into this thinking, if we can get 500 people to click on this, we're going to be happy. Yeah, like 20 minutes later, we nearly took the website down. We had 19,000 clicks in just a course of a few hours. It blew us away.
The QR code renaissance continues. More on that in just a little bit. But first, we did take this podcast live about a month ago. It was the Storyteller Experience. We had 10 incredible storytellers not only share their stories, but also share the stories they're telling. It was so much fun. And if you missed it, there's no need to worry. We're going to bring you each interview over the next several weeks. And then at the end of it all, we're breaking into a whole new season of Storyteller. It'll be the same show with a whole new flow. Enough of that. Let's get to introductions. If you're new here, my name is Sky Muller. I am a sports anchor turned media support guru. I work with some of the top dogs in the media space, helping them tell their stories to the world. And joining me, as always, is Christine Chalk, a multi-Emmy award-winning producer turned VP and a downright media genius. And speaking of genius, we have a genius on the podcast today. So excited about this one. It is Karen Horn, VP of Research and Growth at Altice. Karen's main goal, grow the linear and digital audiences at Cheddar and News 12. And she is the perfect person for this role, given her rich background on some projects like Disney Plus and ESPN Plus, just to name some of the small ones. Karen, welcome to Storyteller.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And, like I said, just some small projects.
Such a rich background. Christine has given a little synopsis about what you do, but give us a little lengthier one, maybe some career highlights on how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So, when I started in the tech industry, honestly, my job didn't even exist, the job that I have now. We were worried about making websites and, 4 or 5 pages, stringing them together and comet cursors. And it was a very, very long time ago in a very different industry. And I was lucky enough to get into strategy and audience development in its earliest stages. And my actual work sort of rolled into streaming video. And in the earliest days of putting CBS episodes up on their website. Of course, we had no idea at that point it would turn into a whole OTT industry. And a small group of us sort of came together and started working with different companies such as Netflix and Hulu, and Disney eventually gobbled me up, and I got to work with BAMTech in its earliest stages as it was acquired by Disney, and I got to work on ESPN Plus's growth, the early stages of Disney Plus's growth, and from there moved on to some other projects. And now I'm in a much more exciting position as I get to work with Cheddar, which is a brand new OTT news network, brand new, a couple years old, but really in the precipice of becoming a very robust OTT first, millennial focused news business network.
I love go ahead. I feel like I cut you off and you weren't done with your story
no,
there.
You're great, go.
No, I was just going to say, I have to give everyone at home a little bit of color. Karen, the first time we ever met, it was over Zoom. And it's probably one of my absolute favorite stories from during the pandemic of working from home. Everyone at home, I literally thought that there was someone in the background of Karen who was trying to join our conversation and chat. And it turns out it was a very, very well-educated 600-word vocabulary parrot. And I have to imagine transitioning from, a bustling newsroom going to home has been a big transition. Now you have some extra friends there at home. What's the transition to doing news at home been like? Have you had any crazy stories with being at work doing this from home?
Oh, so many involving my many, many pets. Quick color there is that I live and own an operating farm. So there's over 100 animals on this property. Most of them are rabbits, but that's a whole nother story and for a whole nother conference that I'm not here for. And then there's the birds and the rabbits or the cats and the dogs, and they generally join into every conference call I ever have. But ignoring all of that, when we started the pandemic, Cheddar and News 12, which is another local brand that I work with, were a standard news network. They had studios and we had to go in to film. There was no world that we could do this from home. And it was never, ever something we could conceptualize. And I want to give credit where it's due. I wasn't really involved with what those teams did to take it remotely, but they took everything remotely overnight. And the production operations teams did amazing work to build out virtual operation rooms. I'm doing a terrible job because this is not my world. And dear Ryan Gordon, who did all this work, please don't judge me too harshly for this, but he created a complete ability for Cheddar to run with its anchors on Zoom and Skype and our guests on Zoom and Skype, and it was seamless, overnight work. And nobody, I mean, obviously the backgrounds changed, but the quality of the network and the quality of the reporting didn't change at all. In fact, in many ways, it got better because we were able to become much more innovative in how we did things, and being able to offer videos and Zooms made things so much simpler for even the guests that were on air. So, I mean, had you ever said to me a year ago that we would be running networks remotely, I would have told you that that was never ever possible, let alone doing it overnight from March 12th to like March 18th.
It is so wild. I mean, the craziest blizzards, the floods, whatever it is, and it seemed like nothing would keep news organizations out of newsrooms. And then here we are, and we're scrambling to figure it out.
Karen, let's dive in. I want to talk about this concept we've been getting so many questions about: QR codes. Everybody it seems like the pandemic has almost mainstreamed QR codes with paperless menus and things that we're so familiar now with scanning our phone. Everybody just did it a few minutes ago with bar trivia. And the question that everyone is asking is, well, does it work on broadcast or on OTT? And one of your news organizations, News 12, recently utilized a QR code, and we were blown away by it does work. Tell us what kind of went into this process, and of course, what you do best, the data behind it.
Yeah, so this is definitely one of those moments where a lot of guesswork went into it. The News 12 team, which was made up of wonderful people, Chris and Manoj, and we just sort of came up with this idea one day of what happens if we play with a QR code. And, we know that the audience is largely sitting there watching their news with their phones in their hand. Approximately 80 to 85% of them is doing that. And they're playing on their email, they're playing on Slack, they're looking up different facts as they hear it on the news. So we know that there's a whole second screen experience going on there, but we've never really connected it together. And in the instances that you're watching here, specifically that first one, the climate instance or the weather instance, we're telling the audience that a major snowstorm is coming. If you want more information about it, scan this QR code, and it's going to take you to our website and give you further information about this snowstorm in your area. There's a strong driving need, a strong CTA to why you want to check into how much snow you're about to get. You know, in my telling you this, even if you're not about to get snow, you want to know how much snow you're going to get. That's just how this kind of works. Mm-hmm. Admittedly, especially for News 12, we have an older audience. So we went into this thinking, if we can get 500 people to click on this, we're going to be happy. Yeah, like 20 minutes later, we nearly took the website down. We had 19,000 clicks in just a course of a few hours. It blew us away. And, we all look at QR codes and we're thinking to ourselves like, oh, it's really become mainstream and it's new. It's not new. Those of us from an older audience remember when QR codes went around the first time, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when it was new then. But the hardware wasn't there to really support it. You had to have a special app. It never really worked. Half the time it didn't really go to the website. But now we've got iPhones, we've got Androids that you just take a picture, the QR code takes you right there. It's a seamless experience. The big catch to it, of course, is that you have to have a strong reason for the audience to use it. You have to leave it up long enough for them to grab their phone or even figure out how to take that picture. So you've got to give them some time. And you've got to have a great experience on the other end. You don't want them to go to a dud of a website. They're not going to do it twice. We've since used this 5 or 6 times. It's admittedly the strongest CTA we had was the weather, but we've seen 6,000 to 8,000 clicks depending on what the situation was after that point. And honestly, how we got to that data, this is as simple as it can be. QR codes, you just throw in the URL, right? All right, so we use Bitly. We just threw the URL into Bitly, we used a Bitly link, and we're getting the data off of Bitly so that we connect how much live linear was driving to the website. I correlate the Bitly against a Google Analytics. There's some drop off, not much. The clicks to actual page views are quite high. The engagement on the site for those coming through the QR codes, enormous, much higher than coming from any other channel.
It's so cool. And I love how you talk about too, being mindful of when you're using that, not just like QR code, QR code, QR code, but picking your points and picking your spots so that it does, become an important part of the newscast, and making sure there's a payoff on the other end. So it's really cool. And one thing I love, Karen, was when you mentioned the guesswork part of things and how there's always a little bit of guesswork. You can have all the data, but there's a little bit of guesswork. You've been doing successful things for several years now. You started working young, so you're still young. Let's not make that seem like we're saying you've been working and you're old and all
right.
this other stuff. What's something that maybe you guessed on 10 years ago and you're still seeing it work today?
Netflix. I think that was longer than 10 years ago. No, I mean, something that we worked on 10 years ago was throwing video on a website. Initially, when we did it, we thought nobody would watch any video. These are, to be fair, this is back when dial-up was still a large portion of those on the internet. Downloading a picture was sort of a standard conceptualization. You'd start the download, you'd walk away, you'd get a cup of coffee, you'd come back, it might be half done. So when we started putting videos on our website at that point for a brand, everybody thought we were nuts. We thought we were nuts, but whatever, we needed to put it somewhere as we had it, we put it up. It worked even then. And of course, now these bite-sized videos and VOD, it's an industry unto itself, but it's taking over even in our consumption habits of articles. Another sort of version of that I was in the early days of was podcasting, which was also something, who's going to listen to somebody ramble on for 20 minutes? Well, frankly, right now, you guys are listening to me ramble on and you're watching me. So both of these gambles worked out for me. But the reality there was these are two worlds that, had I just explained it to you, in no world would you have looked at me and said, yeah, this is going to turn into a multi-million-dollar industry. You would have told me this is nuts. It takes up too much bandwidth. It takes up too much time. Nobody's going to listen to somebody ramble on, especially some rando out in the wilderness somewhere. And yet, it worked. And we didn't know up front it was going to work. It was just one of those things of let's try it, see what happens. And if it does work, great. If it doesn't, well, then there's the other side of it. It just throw it away, goes into my pile of 9,000 other projects that never really worked out for me, because it's great that we talk for all these wins, but I promise you this is the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot of losses underneath it.
Karen, I could sit and listen to you ramble for hours and hours. So those bets you're taking, they're all working. I want to talk a little too. We talked about News 12. I also want to talk about Cheddar. And like you mentioned earlier, for folks who aren't as familiar with Cheddar, it's on demand, it's OTT, it's millennial first. They cover a lot of innovative products, tech, services, etc. One of the series that we've loved is the Cheddar Explains. And, for those who aren't as familiar, we do have some video here that we can roll so you can get a taste of what these look like. But Karen, why is the storytelling on these special? How have you seen the audience engage with this series in particular?
Yeah, so first off, credit to Carl Mueller and Tasia Jensen. Carl is the head of our on-demand team. Tasia is the producer of the particular video that you're watching. These videos really, just for those who don't know what an explainer is, they're taking a topic that's of interest to the audience and explaining how it came about. The how's, the what's, the why's, the who's, the where's. And what this does is it really taps into the audience's curiosity. They might not have known to be curious about this topic, but when they start looking at it, and especially the way that we present it, draws that out of them. And for news specifically, overlaying these explainers with a news audience is an amazing crossover. You're watching the news because you're curious about your community, you're curious about what's going on in the world, you're curious about something. So you just automatically have the nascent need to learn more. And the explainer videos aren't necessarily news, but they are different topics that are out there that you wouldn't have known to learn about had we just left you to your search. In that particular video, it was walking through the sort of dying reservoirs of the West. Would you have gone to look that up on your own? No, absolutely not. You start watching a video on it and you learn about cities that exist now that used to be underwater and how that all came to be and what has happened to all that water. You get sucked in quickly. And that's where this sort of works for us as a news agency, is we have this, when we're off air with our live news, which runs from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., outside of those, we fill it in with this explainer material so that you always have something to keep you interested in what's going on in the community around you. It also functions from a audience growth standpoint, in that we can take all that explainer material, put it up on YouTube, we can put it up on our website, and we can cross it over with the linear channels so that we're bringing together the digital channels and driving them towards our live viewership.
It's such a great cross-channel drive. I used to have an old boss. I used to work in TV in a former life, and who always said, when you're writing your script, make me smarter, make me smarter. And I feel like Cheddar Explains does exactly that. You know, as the viewer, I walk away, you've made me smarter. And pretty much that's how I feel about all of my conversations with you, Karen, but especially this one. We can't let you all go without asking our marquee question. We ask this to every storyteller who joins our podcast, who joins the storyteller experience here. In 3 words, the best stories are blank, blank, and blank.
They are relevant. They are just not one word, sorry guys, but they're something that we all understand and feel, and they're emotional.
Speaking of relevant, how about that great info on the topics that are all the rage these days? QR codes at News 12 and the OTT offerings at Cheddar. Cannot wait until we get to chat with Karen again down the road. But until then, be sure, catch us next week for quotes like this.
The things that we figured out with Tagboard is like, let's make this show interactive. Let's give them a reason to tune at a specific time. It's a little bit of a test, but we want people to give their opinions and basically feel like they have a voice in the show.
That is right. We are going big with Dan Cho, VP of Social and Digital Marketing at Warner Media, more specifically TNT, TBS, and True TV. Cannot wait for that conversation. Until then, catch you next week right here on Storyteller.